So hello everybody and welcome back. I hope everyone's had a nice short break. And more to the point, I hope everybody enjoyed the showcase sessions that we just had. I was actually in the Ericsson session, which was really interesting. And I've heard from my colleagues that the Viasat session as well was a really interesting session. So I hope you both, you enjoyed which one of those you attended. And just to remind you that if there was one of those that you weren't able to attend, they were recorded and they will be made available along with the recordings from all of the sessions that are taking place as part of the event via our YouTube channel. So there'll be a link sent out to that to all of you after the event. So now we're moving on to our final plenary session of the event. So we've talked a lot about 5G throughout the event, but I think now we wanted to use this opportunity to focus a little bit more on some of the national roadmaps and also some of the regional roadmap for 5G around Asia, and also we have a perspective from Europe as well. So we have an hour now for this session, and looking forward to hearing some perspectives from our excellent lineup of speakers that we have for the session here. Following that, we're moving then into the conclusions for the conference. So we have some closing remarks, first of all, and we're going to be joined for that by Atsuko Okuda, who is the new regional director for the region, for the ITU. And then finally, for the last 50 minutes, we're passing everything over to you guys. So it's your turn then to get involved in our Have Your Say session. So you will have the chance to bring your audio and your video live and to give your final conclusions, your final takeaways from the conference. So we're looking forward to that, and please make sure you stick around for that and do get involved. We really want to hear from you and hear what your thoughts are for the conference. So without further ado then, I'd like to get things kicked off for this final session, and I would like to welcome to the stage Christopher Martin. Chris, welcome. So Chris is from Access Partnership and is going to be moderating this last session. So Chris, we're looking forward to it. Over to you.
Thank you, Dan. And hello, everybody. It's great to be assembled here for the final panel session. We're hoping this will make for an interesting final panel as we really dive into how different countries are thinking about their respective paths to a 5G future. And the focus on national and regional plans is interesting because they've really been such a critical component of getting us as far as we've gotten today, but then also laying the groundwork for where we go tomorrow. And the national planning processes here in Asia have been very interesting to see. There have been a lot of first movers in the 5G space in our region, as is well known, and ones that are continuing to evolve their plans. Everything from first movers like South Korea, Singapore, Japan, China, Australia, Malaysia, and Vietnam saw their plans released last year. And we have the distinct and unique opportunity to hear directly from representatives from the governments of Indonesia and Myanmar today in our own panel. So this distinguished panel will be reviewing a number of different elements that we see in 5G roadmaps. And we'll get a chance to dig into some of the questions facing regulators and industry as we think through national plans are formulated and how they're executed. And I'm really looking forward to it. So let's dive right in. Our first panelist is a great way to start this panel is Mr. Amir Riaz. He's a program officer here at the ITU's regional office in Asia. So Amir, please kick us off.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you for the introduction. So my presentation would be not on specific on the plans for any national country in our region, but instead I will be focusing more on the considerations that could be taken up into developing these kind of plans. So next slide, please. So what you should be expecting is these some of the topics, but the idea is that I would try to build up into the last point, that is the consideration that you should take and the countries should take while devising any plans or towards the implementation and rollout of the 5G. Before doing this, all the other four would be kind of a build up to these consideration on why we are proposing this. So next slide, please. Let's start with the definition. In ITU, we use the term IMT 2020, which is the standardized term and comes under the full umbrella of IMT. It is, when we use the term IMT 2020, it's broadly kind of referring to the specification that 5G is, but we are still developing the specification and they are due in the Q4 of this year. Next slide, please. So what we should expect from the 5G, it is very important to understand this when we develop any kind of plan. Usually we see this triangle kind of specification of INT 2020, but essentially the three main corners of the triangle are enhanced mobile broadband, the ultra reliable latency communications, and massive machine type communications. These are the ones that show the applications and the requirements of applications from the 5G. But within that, the functional drivers are also the security and the power efficiency, because as we move from the human to machine interaction to fully machine to machine interaction, the security has to be there, and the power efficiency also has to be there in cases where the IoTs are involved and embedded in the structures. Next slide, please. So coming to the applications, what we can do is we could divide the use cases of the 5G into three main areas. The primary sectors that we know, the manufacturing, transportation, that are one of the major kind of like the applications of the 5G. But also there are some very important applications in the secondary sectors like the education. But in case of 5G, the most area that is gaining the applications and which is driving the business even right now are the technology specialty areas. For example, like the gamification or the cloud uses, using drones on the 5G networks, and much other artificial intelligence. All these kind of applications in their advanced form, they require a network that is has the specifications much more than that we are using right now and going towards the 5G. Next slide, please. These are important to understand because these applications are also in transition. They are not going to be available right now, but as the networks also develop, these whole ecosystem is going to develop. So in this slide, you can see that some of the ideas that have been spread across when these kind of applications are going to be available and when the networks would be able to support, for example, higher latency and reliability kind of applications. Next slide, please. Now we can go and see with the full ecosystem. It is very important to see any ecosystem. The reason is that if we don't understand the whole ecosystem, we will not be able to devise any kind of broadband or 5G plan. You can see the ecosystem. It's a circular ecosystem, but very important, and the most important input is the spectrum, which drives the whole ecosystem and creates an impact. And if you want to increase the impact, even then the spectrum comes in and you have to chip in. These are coming from like the same ideas that if you see in the center, the security is embedded. It is required even in the infrastructure, devices, and at the services level. So this is why in the earlier slide I mentioned that security is one of the key factor involved in developing 5G infrastructure and services and devices. Next slide, please. Now, going in the same way, if you see, these are the challenges that we face right now. I will not go much into the details, but this chart that is also mentioned in one of the sources that is mentioned in the link below. You can see for the spectrum, there are three major challenges that have been identified. One is the fragmented allocation of spectrum. Second, the higher fees because they affect the affordability and the capex requirements for development of 5G. And lastly, the local permits. In the columns, you see which entities are involved in addressing these challenges. So in case of spectrum, it's the policymaker or the regulatory authorities, telcos, and the other admins that are giving the applications on these 5G networks. Now let's go into some details of what is the situation right now globally and where we stand right now. Next slide, please. Now, in the current situation, if we see the statistics that have been made in the 2019 report of Broadband Commission, there have been a steady change in how the regulatory authorities have been addressing the challenges. For example, in case of one KPI, which is the growth of active and passive sharing frameworks, we see that infrastructure sharing of mobile operators have been permitted by many countries in the world. But for the others, for example, co-location and site sharing mandated, there is still a need to grow. You can go to the next slide. These graphs, they mention how the active network sharing frameworks worldwide have been developed, and we can see good transition by according to the region with the Asia Pacific, where right now 29 countries have the active network sharing frameworks available. So we see that the countries also at the policy and the regulatory level understand the requirements, and they have been slowly moving and to facilitate the new networks. Next slide, please. Coming to the Asia Pacific region, it's a very diverse region, and you have to see that in Asia Pacific, the regulators are at multiple level of advancement. So in our ICT regulatory tracker, we track the level at which each country is at the regulatory level, and we divide it into G1 to G5, the generation 1 to generation 5 regulator. So we have analyzed 38 countries, and out of 38 in 2018, there were only 4 countries in Asia Pacific, which accounts to 10% of the whole countries in the Asia Pacific, which were in a G4 or generation 4 regulators. Next slide, please. So this next slide will give you a more idea of which countries they are. There are Pakistan, Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia, which are in the generation 4 category. And from the circular graphs, you will see that we have also seen a good transition over the years from 2010 towards right now in 2018. A number of countries have advanced their policies and regulations to upgrade from one level of G1 to G2 and G2 to 3 and even G4 in the Asia Pacific region. What this means that it's the regulators are on the move, and they listen and understand the challenges and are changing their regulatory regimes as well according to the requirements. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned that this all will build up in the considerations that I wanted to make. The first thing that for every plan we want for any planning for 5G or any network is that all the countries, regulators or the policy makers should make an investment case as a whole national case. What is that the 5G will bring, and they should do it independently, not based on the evaluations of the operators or the potential operators. But in the meantime, they keep on upgrading the 4G networks so that it is more readily available in all the areas in the rural. Then one of the important thing to mention here is that spectrum pricing. As we go towards the 5G, the requirements of the bandwidths are more, and if we keep on following the regimes in which spectrum is seen as some price against a megahertz, then this 5G, which is also already a high capex requiring rollout, it will not go through in the way that we require. Next slide, please. So some other issues that the policymakers should have to see is because the 5G would require a good fiber network, and this investment is going to be high.
Okay, so we seem to have
We've seen that that wireless backhaul could also be introduced. Next slide, please. So some other challenges and key issues that need also to be considered in parallel to the requirements of spectrum. I will not go much into the details, but two of the major ones are asset database. As we know that the 5G rests on development of micro and pico cells using the street furniture. So it is very important that the policymaker, regulators, or even the local governments, they maintain an asset database on which the infrastructure could be posted. if this asset database is readily available, then it eases and increases the speed of the rollout that is required for the 5G. And on the same level, on the same issue, the rights of way issue has been lingering and is kind of like a bottleneck for rollout in many of the countries. And to assist it, it is useful to have a standard right of way agreement that could be developed in consultation with the local governments, so that the issue of right of ways can be dealt easily and more quickly for the rollout. Next slide, please. But these are some of the key considerations. There are already some issues that are getting developed, and they might require that might get more highlighted with the 5G. All of them, these are not all of them. The list is this gives some of them. For example, the privacy rights, consumer awareness. But when developing a national broadband plan or for the 5G, I think these issues also have to be given due considerations. I think this is one of my last slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. Thank you. Over.
Great. Great. Thank you, Amir. That's a great scene setter for the different elements to be considered inside various national plans. So let's hear a little bit more about those national plans directly from the source. I'd like to introduce Ms. Saint Ai, the director at the Post and Telecommunications Department, Ministry of Transport and Communications from Myanmar. Saint, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. Yeah, my name is Saint, and I'm the director for Post and Telecommunication Department, and mainly responsible for the spectrum planning and allocation of the spectrum. So I will start my presentation. Please. So with my introduction of the Myanmar telecom sector, as you all know, Myanmar telecom leapfrogged from 2G, 3G, and 4G as we opened telecom market in 2013 with 2 international licenses to Telenor and Ooredoo. So since 2013, we have introduced like another 2G, 3G service, and we awarded full telecom license in 2017. So it created 4 mobile network operator with the existing operator and MPT. So starting from that, 2017, we have a full competitive market. In 2017, we released LTE 1800 spectrum. So in 2020, we have fully 4G era with numbers of BTS on 4G is more than 25,000, and 4G user penetration reached to more than 60%, and the traffic of 4G occupied 70% of total traffic. Next slide, please. Let me update a little bit on what we have been doing so far, and regarding to facilitate the faster broadband and the 5G adoption. We released the white paper to facilitate faster broadband and 5G adoption, where we made the 6 recommendations. The very important one is the setting up the broadband target, and recommendation 2 is issuing new rules addressing the telecommunication rights of way. As the colleague from ITU already mentioned, that there are several issues in many other countries regarding the rights of way issue, and we understand it very well, and we have some recommendation like how we can address on that right of way issue. Recommendation 3 is the facilitating fixed broadband and 5G infrastructure development, and recommendation 4 is releasing more IND spectrum for wireless broadband and 5G deployment. And we have recommendation for improving the quality of service, and final recommendation is facilitating Myanmar-centric content and application, which we believe that kind of the functional driver for 5G deployment in Myanmar. Next slide, please. So let me share a little bit on how we are going to set the broadband population penetration target. So currently we have right now more high penetration in mobile broadband, but as you can see, we only have less than 1% for fixed broadband penetration. So we have separated the three region, urban, non-urban, and our overall target. So in urban, we already reached more than 90% of broadband penetration, where we need to bring more fixed broadband penetration, and we expected to have 100 Mbps speed, more than 50% of broadband penetration. So in overall, we are expecting to have 20% of broadband penetration in 2024. So the target average speed of 100 megahertz by 2024 for 50% of fixed and wireless broadband is in our target, and which would, we believe, aligned Myanmar with regional example. Next slide, please. And during COVID-19 period, we also released floor price limitation, which is to encourage people to use more, enjoying more services from telecom telecom services, because we realized that the usage of the telecommunication service during COVID-19 is much more increasing, and tariff increased more than 60% during that period. So as you can see, we are having that very cheap price, low tariff, like only $2 for 5 gigabyte, and there are a lot of cheaper cheaper tariff, and also the kind of operator offering 20% cheaper data package, and it's bring more benefits to Myanmar people. Next slide, please. And also we have the Myanmar government set the COVID-19 economic relief plan, where we have 7 goals, and promoting innovative product and platform is one of the 7 goals. And where we have promote innovation product is the available mobile payment service and e-commerces, which can bring only by the mobile technology. Next slide, please. So let me move on to the current spectrum and spectrum aspect, and with the current allocation of Myanmar, and how we are going to have the spectrum allocation for 5G. So this slide shows the current allocation of Myanmar, where we have 4 operators in the market, and MPT have the largest spectrum, and then 4 operators with 110 megahertz. As you can see, we are already allocated like lower band, like 450, 800, 900, and mid band is like 2,100. So we still have to allocate many spectrum in mid band. Let me move on to the next slides. So this slide shows the current mid-band spectrum in Myanmar. So we have 200 megahertz in C-band with the consideration of 25 megahertz guard band after the investigation for the guard band requirement. And we have allocated 40 megahertz in 2600 megahertz. So we still have 150 megahertz in 2600 megahertz band to allocate for future technology. So in 2.3 gigahertz, we all have all of the 2000 megahertz are free, and we are yet to allocate those spectrum. So from that status, I think we are in the very good position to allocate the middle band for 5G technology. Next slide, please. So this is the spectrum, the current tentative schedule of the additional IMD spectrum in Myanmar. So we plan to release the capacity spectrum like 2.6, 2.3, and 3.5 phase by phase in late 2020 and also in 2021. And we were going to release 700 in 2022, and later on 2022 we will have replanning on EGSM and 850 for the coverage band. And we will have another additional 3.5 gigahertz band for the guard band study, and we will release more spectrum on 3.5 gigahertz band in 2023. So other spectrum and millimeter wave will be going to release on demand. And also we plan to release like 600 megahertz and that from later on 2025. This is the tentative schedule of the additional IMD spectrum in Myanmar. However, we still have some issue in 2.6 gigahertz band, which I can share more as a challenge in my later slides. Next slide, please. And we also have some arrangement in 2.6 gigahertz spectrum to get the harmonization between the neighboring country, as we adopted our all TDD approach, and we adopted band 41, all TDD for the whole band. Before that, we have adopted mix like TDD and FDD. So now we have adopted all TDD plan, and we also have some synchronization requirement. Next slide, please. So we adopt the mandatory network synchronization for DDD and 2.6 gigahertz spectrum because we already have the regional service provider in 2.6 gigahertz spectrum, and we will have an MNO who will be operating in 2.6 gigahertz band. So we believe that the mandatory network synchronization will be very important in 2.6 gigahertz band. So we have adopted the mandatory network synchronization. However, there we also believe that where LTE and new radio will exist together, so we don't the frame structure will not be much mandatory. That based on depending on the technology they use, because we use the technology neutral approach. Next slide, please. So let me explore a little bit more on how we think the functional driver of 5G in Myanmar shall be. So according to the current commercial network deployment, are over 40% network with the 5G fixed wireless access. So connect copper replacement, fiber alternative, and diversifying services such as the cloud AR/VR FNC strategy. So all these scenario support for FWA. So we also consider Myanmar FWA will be the potential use case for Myanmar 5G deployment too. Next slide, please. So this is the potential home broadband user in Myanmar. So we are thinking that 3 million subscribers will be demanding on the fixed wireless access. So this is like we think that the fixed wireless access will be the potential driver for 5G deployment in Myanmar. Next slide, please. So this is also the one of the potential for FWA deployment. Next slide. So we understand the investment for the 5G spectrum is one of the challenging issue for the 5G spectrum release. So we are thinking to have the very flexible payment system for all the 5G spectrum, to have like for either to adopt method 1 for the 10-year installment or method 2 with the same grace period. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we think FWA as a national strategy for 5G development, as we have the potential FWA user in Myanmar, national strategy to improve HBB home broadband penetration up to 20% and release new spectrum also drive Myanmar post-COVID-19 economy. Next slide, please. However, we still have some challenges for the allocation of 5G spectrum in 2.6 gigahertz because we already have regional service provider and there are much demand from the regional service provider and MNO. So how we can get the release of the spectrum to the regional service provider and MNO, and also the timing of allocation of additional spectrum and nature of the services. So after solving those challenges, we will have the updated roadmap maybe before the end of this year. So I think this is all of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Saint. And fascinating to hear how a regulator like yourself thinks both through the planning stages and then also responding to crises, as you mentioned, some of the things you guys are doing around the COVID-19 situation. Moving to our third panelist today, also from the government side, Mr. Denny Setiawan, who's Director of Spectrum Policy and Planning at the Ministry of Communications and Information Technology in Indonesia. Denny, it's great to see you again, and please take forward your presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, my presentation, the title is Indonesia Preparation Toward 5G. Next slide, please. So I think this statistic that Indonesia is one of the most populated countries in the world. We have around 180 4G subscribers and 300 plus mobile subscribers. And the internet has been the most important enabler of the country's societal development and economic growth in this country. Next, please. So this is the current situation, the mobile broadband coverage in Indonesia, key for 29. And we almost cover 90% coverage population, but still have 83,000 villages has no 4G signal. So I think this is a quite daunting challenge. And our president, our ministry target us the end of the year 2022, there's all the blank spot, all the villages should be covered by 4G. I think this is very challenging target that were given to us due to the COVID situation, and we need to prepare some broadband connectivity to all. Next slide, please. And this is our backbone fiber optic connectivity. We did successfully the last 5 years to connect all the district in each 500 district in Indonesia of our particularly in outmost with the blue line. We call it palaparing, which through the public-private partnership. That's this project, the backbone, national backbone, also complete in connection with our existing fiber optic connectivity that provided by network operator. Next slide, please. This is also that we understand that not all the backbone and backhauling can provide the fiber optic due to the geographical and situation. So the microwave link distribution, I think, was this quite popular and quite quite good capacity, and but I think this also need the right of way and also the tower acquisition. This is we see also the logistics challenge. So I think this for this country as huge like us, I think the combination among all the service like satellite, microwave link, and 4G, even later on 5G is very important to us. But I think we have also to based on the ITU expert to think about the backbone and backhaul. Next slide, please. So what we see the 5G preparation in Indonesia. So we have put on our national medium-term development plan in this year. So we target 5G is one of the very important key issues for us, and we also put all the regulatory framework, and we now is discussing in Parliament on the omnibus law. I think there's 4 issues that we discuss. One is infrastructure sharing, which is active sharing and passive sharing, and local government permits to facilitate the right of way. And also the other thing, the analog switch off, which is we're also trying to find some deadline of analog switch off to the this legislative procedure. The next slide, please. So this is the overview of our 5G. So we have done the trial since 2007, and we did all kind of several cases like sport, virtual reality, industrial, smart industry, and things for IoT, even the education, right? But most of the trial is in millimeter wave 28 GHz. Next slide, please. So I think this year, we would like to try to have the conduct, I think, real quite challenging trial, coexistence between 5G and FSS trial in extended C-band. we will try, and this is supported by telecom groups. This operator has a satellite and also a mobile operators, but also as the university. So try with have expanded benchmark case from relevant experts from other countries. We plan to have the earlier, but due to pandemic, so we try have probably maybe next month or next couple of months we did the trial and the field trial. Next, please. Next slide. So this is the current spectrum assignment for mobile broadband. So we have 6 major operators. I think 3 of them has quite dominant. And operators, we have adopted the neutral technology policy. Operator can have actually capability to deploy 5G network in current existing if they want. But I think that's the problem is the lack of the bandwidth. And additionally, we have also allowed the class license bandwidth with LA technology in 300 MHz in 5 GHz band. Next slide, please. So this is what we put on our midterm long plan, is that we put the spectrum target in 5 years planning. So current situation, we have 7 so we would like to have more additional bandwidth to 1,000 to 2047, and we categorize into 3 categories. One is a coverage layer, second is capacity layer, and 3 is support data layer. And we see that the challenges, and particularly in the lower band and coverage layer, we still struggle with the facing with analog TV, and we try to have a solution with the ESO policy and regulation to the omnibus law and proposed revision of broadcasting laws. 2.6, we have incumbent service, BSS satellite, and frequency assignment is until the end of 2024. And I think what quite challenging also the 3.5 GHz incumbent service with, we have 7 satellites in orbit and 56 transmitters operating in the band. But I think it's last year in 2019, Indonesia joined the identity footnote, the bands 3.2 to 3.6 for IMT. So I think this is what we have, that we can do some expected output from trial, either the God band or also geographical separation. Next slide, please. So we also established Indonesia 5G Task Force, and including within the internal ministry, and also we invite some experts. It's divided into 5 groups. One is spectrum planning, spectrum allocation, spectrum regulation, spectrum for also private network. The other is business model. The third is infrastructure, like right of way, fiber optic, and small cell, and so on and so forth. And fourth, the device and ecosystem, network security, and so on and so forth. And the fifth, the regulation, which is how we enable the more facilitating regulation for the 5G. Next slide, please. So this is the we think about some key aspect of 5G implementation. One is when will be ready. Maybe some other country had trial first, and then we can learn from their success. And so as the sharing policy and business model innovation, I think that we still try to find the competition, because I think the problem is in Indonesia, we have too many mobile operators and too lack of spectrum. I think this is also, particularly with the millimeter waves, with right of way and fiber optics access, I think we need to think about the other way around. Next slide, please. This is what we'll do this year. We have, I think, we will plan to have a selection process, auction in the remaining 2.3 GHz and the remaining 300 MHz block. So hopefully that we can do this within last of the quarter this year. And we still have existing incumbent BWL regional license, but we will license the green one, the vacant areas, to be licensed to the mobile operators to add the capacity, particularly in big cities like in Java Island. Next slide, please. I think that's conclude my presentation. Thank you very much, please.
Great. Thanks so much, Denny. That was a great introduction to some of the challenges that you guys are facing in Indonesia and how you're seeking to tackle them. We'll move to our fourth and final panelist, and then we can go into the question and answer session. Let me introduce Mr. Bernard Barani. He's Deputy Head of Unit for Future Connectivity Systems at the European Commission. Bernard, please.
Okay, thank you very much for the kind introduction. If you can show up the slides. Yes, that's it. So next slide, please. So it works, yes, thanks a lot. So this slide shows basically what has been our approach for 5G introduction in Europe, and we published in 2016 a so-called 5G action plan, which kind of outlined the European strategy for 5G introduction. It has a number of milestones, but in a nutshell, it said that by 2018 we should be ready with the large-scale trials and pilots for early introduction. In 2020, Europe should have already in all member states 5G-enabled cities, and by 2025, we should have 5G connectivity along all the main major transport passes in Europe, meaning that automotive and transport was taken as one of the key vertical industries to promote 5G development in the context of vertical applications. So next slide, please. Yeah, to make that happen, the first element we have to work with is the regulatory environment. And in 2016, again, we put forward the European Electronic Communication Code, which is the regulatory framework which applies in Europe. It was finally institutionally accepted by the European Council and Parliament end of 2018, and it's going to come into force this year, by the end of this year. And it has a number of relevant clauses applicable to spectrum and to deployment of mobile systems. I cannot not go into the details of each and every one, but it specifies the licensing kind of conditions you can have. That means in terms of duration, in terms of time to bring assignments live in the various member states, and also some specific things such as the deployment of small cells which are needed. And for deployment of small cells, we recently passed in July a kind of implementation regulation that removes red tape for small cell deployments. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of framework conditions, spectrum is obviously one of the key, most important ones. So we have selected in Europe 3 frequency bands for 5G introduction: the 700 megahertz, which provides large coverage and kind of guaranteed quality of service in terms of coverage; 3.6 gigahertz, which is the mainstream, let's say, 5G band; and 26 gigahertz for very hotspot type of high rate and very specific localized type of applications. As you probably know, Europe could not rally the 28 gigahertz position, which was discussed already a few WRCs ago, because of satellite use in this region. So next slide, please. Now, to complement the use in Europe of the frequency bands that we have identified as the pioneer bands, we have passed so-called implementing decisions for harmonization. And these decisions, they specify the condition of use of the various bands in terms of technical conditions, such as blockage masks, such as the radiation levels, the maximum permitted levels. And also for the 26 gigahertz, we amended these decisions just after the last WRCs to take into account specific requirements coming out from the WRC, such as, for instance, out-of-band radiations, limitations into the passive bands, which you find below in the region of 24 gigahertz. So next slide, please. Now, coming to a strategy for implementation, as I said, automotive and transport is one of our key vertical use case that we want to promote. So to do that, we have managed an agreement with the member states, where member states, they define so-called pan-European corridors, so cross-member states corridors. And in these cross-member states corridors, automotive corridors, we deploy 5G technology for tests. So this is undergoing at this moment in time, and it corresponds to the little boxes that you see where you have one project or corridor which is running at this moment in time. But these are more trial and validation type of projects. The ultimate objective is to have actual implementations along all the passes that you see on this map. And this is planned to be supported by an initiative that we call the Connected Europe Facility, which will run starting next year until 2027, where we will provide dedicated money to support these pan-European deployments, where we will finance the corridor part, and the member states will complement with their national part. So that's ongoing in preparation type of activity. So next slide, please. Now, talking about the more immediate type of deployments, Europe is, I would say, part of the early movers, but not the main, let's say, we are not the first ones. Of course, we all know that China, Korea, US, they are very much aggressive and leading in that domain, but this gives you an idea of where we are. So we see that 5G today is deployed in 14 member states. On the left-hand side, top left-hand side, you see that the darker blues means a member state which have deployed 5G in non-pioneer bands in 2 GHz, for instance. Below that figure, you see the percentage of 5G spectrum which has been assigned so far. So the main assignments corresponds obviously to the 3.4, 3.8 gigahertz band, which has been assigned at a level of 38% across the 27 member states. But still, we have a long way to go until we reach the 100%, which normally should happen end of this year. We have in the pipe for 2020, 20 auctions, but as was said before, the COVID has also kind of impacted this timeline for some of the member states, at least 7 of those. We have a lot of trials running in the member states now, 192 altogether. And if you see the lower part on the right-hand side diagram, it shows the type of trials which are being run at this point in time in Europe. The most common being media and entertainment, because it fits the EMBB type of deployment path, which is now the priority for deployment. But second to those, you see that transport, industry 4.0, and automotive are very also popular in terms of trials which are being run. And this gives an indication of the priority that member states are seeing for their vertical use case to come up later. This would require primarily the deployment of the SA version of 5G, which is not yet there in Europe in terms of planning. So next slide, please. This gives you a snapshot of where we believe we will be in 2022 in terms of coverage of population from the perspective of assigned spectrum. So we expect that we will be very close to the final objective, but as I said, it will be delayed compared to our original objectives. Next slide, please. We are also working on future work because, as I said, the code that sets out the regulatory framework applicable in Europe has a lot inside in relation to all the aspects that were mentioned before, incentivizing co-investments or investments, network sharing, access to facilities in cities and so on. So it's all qualified, but what we will try to do in the next few months is to exploit the experience that we start off having with the national deployments to further define best practices among the member states, especially for what concerns a very new area, which is the vertical usage deployments. Next slide, please. So this is a sales pitch. You will have this slide anyway, so you can look at it. But at the bottom of this slide, the important element is that we will have the second stakeholders workshop on 5G Observatory in Europe, 25th of September. So it's a free event. So if you want to connect, feel free to join, and you will be welcome to attend. So many thanks. I think this was my last slide, and thank you very much for your attention.
Great, thank you, Bernard. It's always a fascinating moment to listen to how Europe does things. It's seemingly a microcosm of how different nation states can work together and try to harmonize and find common pathways. Let's jump right into the Q&A session now. We're running a bit behind time, but I've heard from our hosts that we can extend for a little bit. And before we do that, I thought I'd provide the poll results so far to the question around the success of national 5G roadmaps here in Asia. So according to the poll, so far, 20% of the participants think that they've been largely successful. 39% see mixed results. 33% think that it's still to be determined, and then 8% think not so great, or at least so far. So I'll take that as a win sitting here in Singapore. Maybe if we move onto one of the questions that has come in from the audience, and maybe I combine a couple of these in the interest of time. The first question, the timeliness and use cases at the ITU chart don't seem to separate out indoor versus indoor. And there are a number of uses that are for dedicated indoor coverage, whether it's 5G or Wi-Fi. So how do you guys see the spectrum issues differing for providing public network services on private property? And then I think that's to you, Amir, but a similar question or a build out of that to maybe to you, Saint, is what are the spectrum options for building private 4G, 5G networks for local use? These are in things like factories or airports. And is there some form of local licensing or leasing program plan? So talking a little bit about the public versus private nature of these networks. Amir, why don't you go first?
Thanks, Chris. So I think the reference is made to the slide 6 that I mentioned on maturity of use cases. And if you see that what was proposed, that the maturity as the technology develops and it goes from the highly dense area to the more urban and suburban areas, even then the cases also mature. For example, in case of augmented reality or virtual reality cases, the case AR VR applications for retail, they would only be they would mature first, because they need the requirements for the latency are not that restrict. But the AR and VR applications for health services.
Same connection.
Amir, I think you cut out. Yeah, we think we may have lost you. Well, that's okay. We'll get him back shortly. Maybe I'll move over to you, Saint, for the second part of that question.
Oh, he's back? Or
He's back.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, Amir.
Sorry, got cut. So yeah, just I was making a point that as the cases mature, for example, even for a same application, AR, VR, for different purposes, for retail or for healthcare, depending on the latency and restriction of the requirements. So maturity would come with time, with different timelines. So this is one of the reasons they are separated even in the slide that I had mentioned. Just a point on the issue of having some spectrum issues for verticals and in a specific geographic area that might require the demand might be higher and requirements might be higher. So the spectrum requirements is more like the demand is higher. So in such cases, what we saw in different other sessions, there are some initiatives that are coming up. For example, spectrum sharing in specific areas, geographic spectrum sharing in very specific areas. Then there are some other that allow the Wi-Fi development in 6 or 7 gigahertz. So this is kind of like more requirements coming for very specific areas in a geographically high densely populated areas. So it's not only the work is not and the licensing is not going only for the 5G mobile broadband, but also on the Wi-Fi side. So there are 2 options that are coming up, both on the 5G and also increasing the bandwidth for the Wi-Fi. Chris?
Yes.
Thanks, Amir.
Thank
Please,
you, Amir. Yes. As Amir already mentioned about the demand for batika industry, as Myanmar is not having such kind of the batika industry demand right now, because the ARVR or kind of the machinery or the factory where the demand for the local own network for 5G is still very low, because we are having that the discussion with the cross industry and also with the operator for such licensing issue, whether we should put aside the separate spectrum for the local license, or we shall have the model of the providing service by the MNO, which is at the discussion. But up to now, we don't think we should put aside such spectrum, and we may have to open additional spectrum in 6 gigahertz for the Wi-Fi, as Alma said, so that might solve kind of the issue up to some extent, I guess. Thank you.
Thanks, Saint. So another question, this one directed to you, Denny. It suggests, as a 5G task force is expected to be completed by the end of 2021, does that mean that Indonesia will only be releasing 5G spectrum in 2022?
Not necessarily, right? I think we have a parallel task force, sub-task force. So I think, and you know that we adopted technology. I would like to have, we want to have this task force working in parallel, because I think the 5G task force is an end-to-end ecosystem. For example, even with current spectrum, you can have 5G. This is because we adopted technology, and we expect that with this year, with remain release the 2.3, even maybe not enough. Yeah, you can, the product is free to have 5G or not. But I think this does depend on ecosystem. The ecosystem now in 3.5 gigahertz is mature, and we have struggled to reach that. So I think that's it's depend on the timely when the spectrum, the new spectrum available.
Thanks, Denny. Another question, this one directed to you, Bernard. Are European 5G pioneer bands looking a bit flawed because of the more rapid adoption of dynamic sharing and existence of 4G bands for 5G? The question asks a little bit of some of the options available, and the fact that there's no EU strategy for local enterprise or spectrum applications. And is this going to change?
Well, you know, spectrum licensing and award of licensing is directly a prerogative of the member states. So from our perspective, what is really important is that the regulators have available at their hands the right toolbox that they can use to make the assignments according to the needs of their specific ecosystem. For instance, we talked about verticals yesterday and today. If you look at what's happening on verticals, Germany has assigned 100 megahertz in the upper part of the C-band. Sweden is thinking of something in the same band, but maybe not at the same position. Yesterday, we heard that Finland is looking into 3.8, 4.2 gigahertz band for vertical. So there are a lot of different possibilities depending on the national situation. For instance, Finland, they have this type of band because they don't have so much satellite use, which possibly is not so much doable in other member states where satellite usage is much more developed. So we need to try to cater for all these dedicated and specific situations, and that's what we are trying to put in place by identifying best practice across the member states to see how we can, let's say, put in place some elements which corresponds to these various use case deployments. What is important is that at the end of the day, we don't fragment too much the ecosystem, and we don't fragment the ecosystem at all. Is that even if there are different type of developments in terms of spectrum licensing in the member states, we create vertical ecosystems which is relatively homogeneous all over Europe, and this is the kind of exercise we are entering into at this point in time.
Interesting. Yeah. This next question is directed for the whole panel, and it's thinking about network competition. It suggests, given the trend towards greater network sharing in 5G, how important is the need to maintain network-based competition? Should there be greater flexibility for operators to pool their resources, including their spectrum resources, to meet these national policy objectives that are being laid out? whether that's by coverage area, quality of service, or early rollout ambitions?
Yeah, may I take the floor first? Yeah,
Please, Dan.
I think it's very important for Indonesian case. We have too many operators, 6 operators, and the lack of spectrum. So I think the network sharing, the spectrum sharing is probably one of the element that we can have balance between competition and flexibility to roll out. But I do also believe that one player or one network solution cannot solve the competition issue. Thanks.
Yeah, I have the same idea with my Indonesia colleague, because regarding the limited resource of the spectrum share is also encouraged, but we have to consider, provided that the competition is very much taken into the consideration for have the healthy market.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, sorry, I'm here.
Yeah, I would say that it depends on country to country. For example, if there is a high competition, then the regulator has a huge role to play, because otherwise there would be a higher fragmentation of the spectrum as well. If we go along that way, and the spectrum, I think it's not even usable for 5G anymore, even in 2.3, 2.6 or mid bands, especially on these bands. So yeah, it depends on country to country how many operators are there, and then regulator has to make some decisions on this, how many to allow, and creating bands and the chunks suitable enough for deployment of 5G is very important.
Thanks, all of you. Very, very interesting to hear those different perspectives. There's one question I wanted to dig into a little bit, because we're really thinking about these plans in Asia, which has some really unique characteristics. One of which is the urban-rural divide. So there are many of the world's largest cities here, but also huge rural geographies. And while 5G is really thought of, I think, primarily for urban environments, regulators have to address the gaps with rural connectivity. So how are countries addressing these bifurcated priorities in the national roadmaps and band plans we're seeing? And do you think countries can balance realizing a 5G future with actually playing catch up on rolling out some of the 4G networks and the other basic connectivity infrastructure like fiber, as we had seen in some of the presentations?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, for a country like Indonesia, I think the satellite is a must. But we understand that in some big cities like Jakarta and Surabaya, we have to compete with other countries to provide this quality of service of 5G. So I think there's a chance that we can have geographical separation between big cities for 5G and rural satellite. But the problem is money in big cities, right? So I think this how the government should intervene, should have some policy, maybe some incentive, like what we have in other countries, like spectrum incentive auction, or like in whatever in other countries. So I think there's some incentive that should be given to government, how to balance with the spectrum pricing incentive. Thanks.
Yeah, I think I already included in my slide how government should have the flexibility in terms of spectrum pricing to encourage the initial investment and so on. So, yeah.
Just to mention, as we say that we have in ITU, we say the IMT is the term that we use. So IMT doesn't only have a terrestrial component; it also has a satellite component as well. So we also have to see that in places where, for example, the connectivity of fiber is not possible or is not business friendly, then this satellite component comes in as well through HAPS or high throughput satellites as well.
Last question, and I think we have to be brief. It was just mentioned about the pricing, and it's come up in a couple of the presentations. And it's been said that spectrum pricing could really break 5G momentum. And some would suggest there have been a few examples of unsuccessful or challenged pricing strategies in Asia. So do you think this is a real problem for our region? And how are roadmaps and national plans trying to take that into account?
Yeah, I think this is we have to think about new way on how to price this spectrum. The new radio is different with previous whereas now data is need a lot of investment on 5G. So we think about the how the 5G spectrum. Well, so my thing is that how we can like to compensate the incumbent, for example the pricing as a way to compensate the incumbent, like what we have in other country. That's my thinking, right? And then not necessarily all the money given to the tax for tax non-tax budget or to the government revenue, but how to compensate or how to relieve the burden of the operators.
Well, any other final comments across the panelists?
Yeah, just one more comment maybe. This is one of the considerations that I mentioned in my presentation, that it would be useful for before developing any plan for administrations to take up a study of the socio-economic impact that it will create the 5G versus the capex cost through an independent study. Then they would be in a better position to plan and develop any kind of strategies and policies. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Amir. Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Saint. Thank you, Denny. It's really been a pleasure sharing this panel with you. And thank you so much to our host, Dan, for having us, and look forward to the wrap up here.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, echoing those thanks to all of the panelists. It's a really fascinating panel. And Chris, thank you to you as well. Excellently moderated. And we had some great questions coming in, and it was great to get that bit of discussion going at the end there. So thank you all very much. And I think a really good way to close off the conference, or the sessions at the conference anyway. I think, as I said, 5G has been a constant theme, as we would expect throughout the sessions we've had so far. So to hear a little bit more about some of the roadmaps, some of the plans, and some of the considerations when putting those roadmaps together really was a great way to finish things off. So thank you all very much indeed. So that is now just about it for the sessions at the conference. And now we're going to be moving to some of the conclusions. So very shortly, we're going to be inviting all of you guys out there to come and give your conclusions and your thoughts on the conference, the sessions, your key takeaways and things like that. So we're going to be moving to the Have Your Say session area very shortly. And that will be your chance to bring up your video feed, bring up your audio feed, and become part of the discussion. So we're really looking forward to that in about 5 or 10 minutes or so. But before we do that, it's my great honor to now welcome to the stage our keynote speaker for the closing remarks. So I'd like to welcome Atsuko Okuda to the stage. Atsuko-san, welcome. And I think we're delighted to have you here with us. And when I introduced Mario at the start of the session, or the start of the conference, I should say, which was what seems a long 4 days ago now, I said how closely we work with the ITU team, both in Geneva and also in the region itself. And we're delighted to have you here and to be part of the event, and really looking forward to hearing your thoughts. So Atsuko-san, I'd like to pass the floor over to yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organizer for the successful conclusion of the 6th annual conference on spectrum management in Asia and the Pacific. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19, the conference was organized virtually, but I believe that the participation remained strong, with over 500 participants at some sessions. ITU has been collaborating with Forum Global over the past years, and with the joint efforts of various partners, this conference has become one of the major events on spectrum management in Asia and the Pacific. All the sessions had excellent and insightful discussions. Questions from the participants certainly enriched the deliberations, including on topics such as outcomes and impacts of WRC 19 and various views and opinions on WRC 23 from within as well as outside the region. The role of sub 1 gigahertz bands and mid bands for emerging use cases, I believe, steered very interesting debates and discussions, together with interesting case studies on reforming and innovative initiatives of spectrum licensing. We believe that these discussions are timely to the planning and actions at our member country government national level. One of the key messages emanating from the conference, I believe, was the need to have harmonized approach to spectrum management in the region. This is where regional organizations such as APT and international organizations like ITU could strengthen our interventions and support in moving forward. Furthermore, in order to facilitate the discussion and development of business cases around IMT 2020, the countries are encouraged to develop a future-oriented spectrum outlook or master plan with focus on affordability. This brings back to the question on COVID-19. There has been a significant demand increase for digital connectivity and services. Affordability would be a key to build back better in the recovery from COVID-19 pandemics. During the last session, there was a question on rural and urban connectivity and coverage, which came up. In order to address the issue and enhance the digital inclusiveness, ITU and UNICEF are implementing a school connectivity initiative called GIGA to ensure that people in rural areas are not left behind. And this is just one example on how ITU is addressing and helping the countries to respond to the COVID-19 pandemics. We at ITU stand ready to support member countries and work with partners and stakeholders to move forward with the expansion of inclusive and affordable connectivity, and look forward to the next opportunity to meet you all. And thank you again for inviting ITU to this conference. Back to you, Dan.
Atsuko-san, thank you very much for those words, and I think that's a very fitting way to wrap up the conference. And we too are very much looking forward to working with you and your team moving forward, and hopefully, as you say, for the next event, being able to maybe do it in person and to meet in person. So thank you so much again. In the meantime, thank you. So that does wrap up our formal part of the conference, and now we are going to be moving to the final chance for everybody to have their say and to give your conclusions and your key takeaways for the event. So what I'd like to invite everyone to do now is to move to the Have Your Say area of the site. So you'll see on the left-hand menu bar, I think it's the third icon down, I think it is. You need to click on that icon there. Move into the Have Your Say room, and then you'll have the option to request to bring your audio and video live. If you do that, that will show us then that you want to come up and want to give a few thoughts. We will then bring your audio live, and you'll be brought up onto the stage to give your final conclusion, to give your final thoughts on the event. So we'll all move down there now. I will be making my way over there, and I will see you in the Have Your Say room in just a couple of seconds. So thank you very much. We'll see you shortly. And once again, before I go, thank you again to our panelists and to all of our speakers for the event. Thank you very much.